Today's daf is Boker Tov. Today's daf Samach Hey in Sanhedrin. Today's daf Samach Hey in Sanhedrin, as we learn for Achenukol Beis Shalom and Sunan Basar V'Shivya. Today's Gemara is about sorcery, necromancy, talking to the dead, or trying to elicit responses from the dead. Says the Mishnah, Baal Ov Zeh Pitam HaMedaber Mishechyo. Ov, there's two kinds. Pasuk talks about Baal Ov and Yidoni. We always talk about those two things together. It's always mentioned together. So what's the difference between them? So Mishnah says that Baal Ov is like a sorcerer who speaks. We'll say he takes a skull of a dead person and puts it under his armpit and it speaks from there. He asks questions and answers questions from there. V'Yidoni Zamadaber V'Piv. He takes some sort of a bone of an animal. We'll see what the animal's called. If that's an animal called Yadu, it could be a bird or some sort of an animal. Sticks that in his mouth, and then he doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything, as we'll see. With the Baal Ov, what he does is he puts it under his armpit, and he sort of flaps his armpit, and the skull speaks, answers questions about the future. And whereas with the Yidoni, he sticks this a bone in his mouth, doesn't make any movement at all, and it just speaks. Now, there's a difference between the two. We'll talk about that. Reil Beskila, if you try to perform those forms of sorcery, which is also similar to Dorish Mason, which is another Isser, talking to the dead. We'll talk about the difference. So those are your Chayiv Skila, as we mentioned before. We said in the Mishnah back on, where was it? On not Nun Zion, but where was it? We talked about the things that you're Chayiv Skila for, right? That was the Mishnah. Let's find it again. Oh, no, it's not here. Back on Nun Vav, was it? Nun Vav, let's see. Or earlier. No, Above, no. So Mason, I'm losing the place here. Let's say we got it. No, it's earlier on. It's Nun Gimel. In Nun Gimel, back on Nun Gimel, the Mishnah mentioned, we talked about Megadev, cursing Hashem, or come some opinion. Megadev is a kind of avodah zarah, right? Machlok is whether it's avodah zarah or just cursing God. We discussed yesterday. Ubal o v'yidoni. So these things are chayiv skila for. That's what the Mishnah tells us now, that whether it's over yidoni, whether it's taking the skull and putting it under your armpit and flapping your armpit and it's speaking from there, or taking the bone of this animal or it might be a fish of some sort, and stick it in your mouth and it speaks by itself, you're chayiv skila. V'hanishal b'hem, if you ask questions of them, in other words, not the sorcerer who's actually performing it with the bone or the skull in his possession, but rather one who asks questions, he's over on a lav. That's an ashara, that's a lav, not the same. For that, presumably, it's a lav, whether it's a lav shem b'malchus, where you get malchus, but it's a different question, but you're not chayiv skila for that. Now, in the Gemara asks in the beginning of Krisis, the Mishnah mentions there, at the beginning of Krisis, right on Daf Beis, it says that there are 36 times that you're chayiv achatas. In general, we have a rule that if you're chayiv on zdono kares, if you're chayiv for kares for doing it b'mezid, b'shogi you're chayiv a chatas, and it lists 36. Now, when it lists them over there, these are also zdono kares. If usually it's on its skila if it's edom and asra, and in most cases it's skila, or even in most cases where you're chayiv, or let's say in many cases where you're chayiv bizdono kares, if you did it b'mezid kares, if there's with edom asra, there's skila, and he did it b'shogi, you're chayiv chatas. So there, when it mentions them, it doesn't mention yidoni. Ma'ishna hachadik tani Baal Ov Yidoni. Here in our mission it says Baal Ov and Yidoni, both things. Now, whether that's tu isurim or not, back we had earlier on, it seemed to be a machlokas Rashi and Tosas whether there are two different isurim, or whether they're two different things that you're chayiv for, but it really comes under one category. And that's going to be where we're going to allude to that now, because here we're also going to talk about a shayla in the Gemara, whether you're chayiv malchus on both, or the chayiv skila for both, or if you did a b'shogeg, would you bring one chatas? Or if you did both of them, would you bring two? That's what we're going to discuss now. So Ma'ishna hachadik tani Baal Ov, here it mentions both. Ma'ishna gabe krisis, the beginning of krisis, tani Baal Ov, v'sharili, it didn't mention Yidoni at all. So we have two opinions here, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan are hol b'shneim b'lav echad namu. They're both in the same lav. In other words, it's one lav for Ov and Yidoni together. So since they're both one, so it mentions only over there ov and not yidoni, right? It only mentions ov, bal ov. It doesn't mention yidoni because they're both in one lav. Meaning, if you did both of them, you only be chayiv. If you did both of them b'shogeg, you only chayiv one chatos. That's Rabbi Yochanan's. Shloka says no. You'd only think shem b'maisa. Over there, we're talking about things you're chayiv chatos for. Things that you're chayiv chatos for is it must involve an action. If it's a lav she'ein b'maisa, you don't bring a chatos for that. We had a shaila lav she'ein b'maisa in the case of malchus. You get malchus for that, right? Do you get malchus lav she'ein b'maisa? We generally presume that you don't, like Rabbi Yaakov, the machlokas Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda the other day. Rabbi Yehuda says lav she'ein malchus, you get malchus. Rabbi Yaakov says that you get malchus. Rabbi Yaakov says you don't get malchus. Here we're talking about the chatos though, because it says asher lo se'asena. You have to do something to be chayav chatos. So Rishlakisham Yidoni lefi shein ba ma'isa. That's why Yidoni's not mentioned over there. It's the chayav chatos because there's no ma'isa there. Rabbi Yochanan says the reason why it's mentioned over there is because if you did both, you only chayav one. So why did you mention this one? So why did you mention ov? If ov and Yidoni are both the same, meaning that if you did both of them, you only chayav one chatos. You only chayav one chatos. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Shneim b'lav echad nemru. So if you did both, you only chayav one. So I mentioned ov and not Yidoni. Ma'ishna bal ov denokat. Shum the pasuk like because the pasuk when it talks about ov and Yidoni always mentions ov first. So he mentioned that one first over there too. But the reason he doesn't mention them both is because if you did both, you only chayav one chatos. Reish Lakish, that's what Rashi says. In other words, you're chayav a carbon. You see, the differences are according to Reish Lakish, you're not chayav a carbon over there. You're not chayav a carbon chatas in the case of Yidoni because it's a lav shem b'maisa. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say that. Rabbi Yochanan says no. That's not considered a lav shem b'maisa. The reason is because if you did Yidoni by itself, you would be chayav chatas. If you did O by itself, you would be chayav chatas. But you did both, you only chayav one, so it only mentions one. Why does it mention O? Because that's one's mentioned first in the pasuk. The pasuk Peikra. But Reish Lakish, why didn't Reish Lakish give Rabbi Yochanan's reasoning? Amra Papa Chalukan, even though they're not separate. If you did both things, you only chayav one chatas. But Chalukan and Bemisa, they are mentioned when it comes to their punishment of skila. It mentions them both. Rashi in the widest lines. Take a look at Rashi in the widest lines, the first line in the widest lines in Rashi. Either or, they will die for that. You get a skila for that. So since they're mentioned separately there, you can't say that they are together, like Rabbi Yochanan's reason. They're saying in one lav. They're one lav, but they're mentions them separately. It doesn't say ov yidoni. It says ov o yidoni. So therefore, it says chalukan and b'misa. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold of that. Chalukan de lav shma chaluka. If there's two separate lavs, in other words, you're not going to get chayav achatas or any other punishment, skila or whatever, or even malchus, unless there's a losase. Chalukan de lav shma. If there's separate lavs for each one, if it says don't do ov and don't do yidoni, that's a chaluka. Chaluka de misa lo shma chaluka. Rabbi Yochanan, why did Rabbi Yochanan give Reish Lakish's reason? Very simple. Yidoni is a lav shein b'maisa. A lav shein b'maisa, you're not going to get a chatas for. There's no chatas for that. And decreases Rabbi Akiva. You know why? The mission over there, yes, maybe I hold that way. That it's a lav shein b'maisa, but the mission increases is talking about goes according to Rabbi Akiva. And Mekiva Damar Lo Bin in Maisa. He says you get kares, you get the chatas, even if there's no Maisa. So therefore, that wouldn't be a good reason. The reason it mentions a Oven Yidoni, according to Rabbi Yochanan, either one you'd bring a chatas for, right? Either one you would really bring a chatas for. But the Mishnah over why? Because they're both the difference why it only mentions over, because if you did both, it's one lav. It's one lav. If you did both, you only chayiv one chatas. But if you did Yidoni by itself or O by itself, either one, you'd be chayiv a chatas for. It's a lav shem b'maisa. Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan say like Reish Lakish? That's a lav shem b'maisa. So he didn't mention Yidoni. Again, Yidoni, you don't do any action. You're not flapping your armpit, getting nothing. You just stuck the bone in your mouth by Yidoni, and it talks of its own. So you're not doing anything. So maybe that's why Reish Lakish says that's why it's not mentioned over there. It's a lav shem b'maisa. You don't get chatas for. Was Rabbi Yochanan? Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan give the same reason? Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan give that same reason? So Rabbi Yochanan will say the Mishnah increases, goes like Rabbi Akiva says you don't need a maisa. You're chayiv anyway. So it goes like Rabbi Akiva says you don't need maisa. So therefore therefore, in terms of lav shem b'maisa, that doesn't work. The reason why it doesn't work is because if you do both together, it's only one lav, and you only be one chayav chatas. But each one alone would also bring a chatas. Resh Lakish nehida lo boy Rabbi Kiva Maisa, Resh Lakish, who says over there that the reason Yidoni is not mentioned in Krisis is because it's a lav shem b'maisa, so there's no chatas. He says it goes like Rabbi Kiva and a chanami, but even Rabbi Kiva needs some sort of a maisa. Rabbi Kiva, Resh Lakish, nehidlo boy Rabbi Kiva maisa. Rabbi doesn't need a big maisa. Maisa zut, but he needs some sort of an action. For example, megadef. What's the maisa there? There it mentions megadef as one of the 36 things that you're chayav achatas for if you did it b'shogeg. My maisa ika kumasvasim, you your lips. Have a maisa. Balov. What's the action there? My maisa. Ika hakashas rosa, flapping your arms, flapping your arms is a maisa. Either you put the ov under your arms, or some say between. We'll see on Amid Beis that you put it between any joints, whatever. You put the skull there. That's a maisa. So therefore, Resh Lakish says, yeah, the mission there can go like a bekiva, but the reason why the Yidoni is not mentioned because there's no maisa at all. You're not speaking. You're not moving your hands. You're not doing anything. Says the Gemara that so Resh Lakish says that even the Rabbanan would say that. In other words, he says over here, Resh Lakish says Rabbi Kiva and a Chanami doesn't need a ma'isa, but he needs some sort of a ma'isa. He needs moving your lips, something like that. Nafilu Rabbanan, is that really the case? Even according to Rabbanan, the Rabbanan also say that that these kind of things are not considered according to Resh Lakish. The Rabbanan would say these things are not considered a ma'isa. But Tanya, we learn only chayev achatos on something that involves an action. Kagon zivuach, slaughtering, kitor, burning incense, nisuch, libations, ishtachava, bowing down. Now, slaughtering, offering incense, pouring, that's an action. What about bowing down? What's your action? You're just moving your body. Almost like Shmantan ishtachava, Rabbi Kiva. The one who says bowing down is also an action is Rabbi Kiva. Says you don't need a maisa rabba, just moving a little bit, bending over, bowing down is a maisa. Rabbi Yochanan says afilu teim rabbanan, could even go like the rabbanan kfikas komasol rabbanan ravi maisa. That's also bowing down. In other words, when the brisa says you're only chayiv on davar maisa, like slaughtering, incense, libation, or bowing down, Resh Lakish says that only goes according to Rabbi Kiva. That says you don't need a big maisa. That's also a maisa. But so Rabbi Yochanan says no. The Rabbanan also say that's a ma'isa. But Resh Lakish, who says that Ishtachava is only a ma'isa according to Rabbi Kiva, so Hashla Resh Lakish Kfifas Kamaslo Rabbanan ma'isa. If Resh Lakish says that according to Rabbanan, he says Ishtachava is only a ma'isa according to Rabbi Kiva, but according to Rabbanan it's not a ma'isa. So if Resh Lakish says that bowing down, bowing your body down, bending your body, bowing it down to Rabbanan is not a ma'isa, hakashus rosa of the Baal Ov, havi ma'isa, how could b'ma'isa? The Mishnah over there, he says, again, Resh Lakish's opinion is, why isn't Yidoni mentioned in Krisis? Because it's not a ma'isa. Ov Yidoni is a ma'isa according to the Rabbanan. How could Ov Yidoni be a ma'isa? Resh Lakish doesn't even hold, according to Rabbanan, that bowing down is a ma'isa. If bowing down is not a ma'isa, how could flapping your arms could be considered a ma'isa? Resh Lakish says that Mishnah over there is going according to Rabbi Kiva, who says that yes, Ov is a ma'isa, bending down, moving your lips, Megadef is a ma'isa. Aval Rabbanan lo, but according to Rabbanan, that's not considered a ma'isa. So wait a second. If bowing down is not considered a ma'isa, speaking is not a ma'isa, Yihachi, Yotzim Megadef, the Mishnah over there says, okay, there's 36 isurim that your chayiv kars for b'meisa and your chayiv carbon b'shogeg, and lists the 36. One of them is megadef, cursing Hashem, Rahman al-Islam, cursing Hashem. But according to Rabbanan, according to the way Resh Lakish learns, the Rabbanan say that Ov is not a ma'isa either. Right? According to Rabbanan, again, Resh Lakish says that the Mishnah goes like Rabbi Kiva, who says that Ov is a ma'isa, megadef is a ma'isa. The end of the Mishnah says that megadef is not a ma'isa. According to Rabbanan, the Rabbanan say megadef is not a ma'isa. According to what you're saying now, Baal Ov is also not a ma'isa, because all you're doing is flapping your wings, flapping your arm, and having the skull under your armpit or whatever is not considered a ma'isa according to Rabbanan. So how could if you're saying the Mishnah over there also goes like a Bekiva, and that's why Megadef is a ma'isa. So when the Rabban at the end of the Mishnah it says the Rabbanan say Megadef is not a ma'isa, so Baal Ov is also not a ma'isa. according to Rabbanan. Elamar Ula, the Makata L'Shade. You know what it's speaking about over there? That's a different kind of ov. Here we're talking about all these sorcery and necromancy and all these kind of things. He says there it's speaking about where you actually offered incense to a demon. You offered incense to a demon. That's the ov that we talk about over there. That's already a Maisa. That's really Avodah Zarah. What are you talking about? Rashi says 8 lines from the bottom of the page. The Baal Ov Diktani Bekrisis and Motor Rabbanan, the Ramonim, but that is a Maisa, because the Rabbanan say only Megadif is not a Maisa, because he didn't do anything. All he did was speak. But they were speaking about where you offered incense before a shade who was responsible for that kind of sorcery. That's literally Avodah Zarah. And Avodah Zarah is mentioned over there. So how can you say Baal Ov? Ov also means offering incense to a shade and Avodah Zarah. That is Avodah Zarah. You know what that means? Makata l'chaber means that he's offering incense to as a charm to gather the shadim. Rashi says over here, take a look at Rashi, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the page. He's not doing it for idol worship. Through all he's doing is he, so to speak, he's calling the shadim for a meeting. Through offering incense, he does sorcery to gather the shadim here, not for Avodah Zarah. And the first name that he was Makata l'Shade means actually was sorcery to the demons as an act of Avodah Zarah. So that's already Avodah Zarah. You already mentioned Avodah Zarah. How could how could O be the same as Avodah Zarah? No, here it's speaking Makata l'Chaver. Amalei Abaya, Makata l'Chaver, Chover Chaveru, right? Makata l'Chaver, if you offer incense, that's one of these surah mentioned in the pasuk. That chover chover, don't gather animals, let's say, and that's only a lav. So how can you say that's one of the things where that's only a lav? That's only a lav of malchus. That's not a lav that's that you're chayiv zona kores and shigos or chatos. So how can you say that that's what the ov over there is? This ain. It is chover chover. V'atorah amr chover zeb b'skila. And this one's skila. If you gather the shadim to bring the sorcery via them, that's talking chayiv skila for. Okay. If you're just using sorcery to gather animals together, that's a law, but it's not chayiv skila. Yeah.
How about if he has taught himself to be
a sorcerer?
No,
a ventriloquist. Yeah. Okay. So
doesn't move his lips.
No, right. So there, right.
Come out.
Right.
So he's really a showman.
Right, he's a showman. But what is he doing? What is he doing with it? That's the question. What is he doing? If he's speaking to the dead and trying to talk about the future, then that would be a problem. If he's just got the little wooden, animal next to him, the guy talking, the little dummy, that's just a show. That doesn't mean anything. Everybody knows that doesn't do anything. He's not communicating with the dead. All this is involved in communicating with the dead and trying to get them to say the future. Tana Rabbanan, 6, 7 lines from the bottom of the Gemara. From the bottom of the page. Tana Rabbanan, Chover Chover. The pasuk says again. In Perik, we quoted this pasuk yesterday when we talked about Mavrim B'no Lamolech. The pasuk says there, Lo Yimotze B'chol Mavir B'no Bita Ba'esh Kosim Ksamim Onim Nachash Machashe V'chover Chover. Don't do those things. So when it says don't do those things, right? Shol Ovi Yadoni V'dor Shalom Mason Kisavas Hashem. So there, if you're doing it to raise the dead, to talk, to get the demons to raise to gather them together for this purpose, then you're chayiv skila. Otherwise, it's only a lav. As Rashi says, chover choveru ve'eino ela b'lav. It's not. It's only a lav, meaning it would only be a lav. But a lav, like, it depends how you do it. If you're doing it for animals, as we'll see in a minute, that's only a lav. If you're doing it to be dor shalom mason, raising the demons, gathering them together to be dor shalom mason, then you're chayiv skila. Turn Rabban in the Gemara. Whether you're gathering large animals or small animals together. Why would you do that? Why would you get animals together? So it depends. Sometimes you're just doing it for gaming. Sometimes you're doing it to protect yourself. Even small animals like snakes and scorpions. If you gather together wasps or hornets and scorpions, even though your intention was that they shouldn't damage you, you're just trying to gather them together. In other words, instead of laying traps and things like that and trying to find them and using all kinds of things to repel them away, you use some sort of a sorcery to gather them together. Even though your kavanah is that they shouldn't damage you, it's also to do, unless, of course, it's pikuach nefesh. Rashi says, that if he's about to kill you or something like that, then you could use any means to get there, right? Rashi says if he's running after you and you're trying to protect yourself, then it's not osur. It's pikuach nefesh. Ain't davar pikuach nefesh, except for the 3 cardinal sins. But otherwise, pikuach nefesh is mutter. The only thing over here is they're not running after you. You're just trying as a preventive way to keep them away. So that's you shouldn't do that, right? Rabbi Yochanan, so now the Gemara says like this. Well, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says what? Again, Rish Lakish says that the Rabbanan would say that all those things like ov, like the regular ov that we're talking about, not the kind of gathering the demons together for sorcery, but the regular ov is not considered a maisa, and the way Rish Lakish holds in the Rabbanan. But Rabbi Yochanan says that it is. Rabbi Yochanan said even when it says ishtachaba according to Rabbanan, the ishtachaba you shouldn't that ishtachaba when the Bryce said en chai ve'al adav sheish ba'maisa comes zibuch kitam nisur hashtra, and Rabbi Yochanan said even could go like the Rabbanan that bending your body is that. So Rabbi Yochanan ma'ishna the kfif is kamaslu Rabbanan havi maisa v'kimas vasav lo havi maisa. Again, the Rabbanan say in Kores in Krisis, Rabbanan say no, you're not chayiv chatos for that because there's nothing involved in just moving your lips. It's not considered a maisa. So why is bending your body a maisa and moving your lips is not considered a maisa? The key with Megadev is not moving your lips. It's what's in your intention, what's in your heart, because that's what makes it. If, for example, if a person's thinking not about God, he's thinking about some stupid idol, and he says, "I curse God, small g." Right? I curse God. That's not Megadef, right? So the key is what's your intention. So therefore, the words don't mean much there. The words are not important. When the main thing is this kavana. That's why moving your body, bowing down, you're doing an action. The words that you speak, moving your lips when Megadef is not the key. The key is what's your intention. Masar Rav Zayron, I'm at base now. Yatsu Edom Zomen. Edom Zomen, there's no chatas over there. Shein ba'maisa v'mai halasim. That doesn't depend on what's their intention is. Depends on what they said. Depends on what they said, and therefore, that is moving their lips. Why aren't they chayiv their chatos if they did it b'shogig? But it is the key. Their whole idea there is that it's based on what they said, what their voice was. But called Rabbi Yochanan lav ma'isa. In other words, it's not moving their lips what counts; it's their voice, and their voice is not considered a ma'isa. It's a davar she'ein bo mamish, as Rashi says, it's davar she'ein bo mamish, and therefore it's considered like Megadef. Rashi says, "Shani yom zamhol v'yeshnu b'kol iker chiyuvim b'shmias kolam they beznu ba b'kol es beimamish hilkach." It's like Megadef, and it's like Megadef. It's totally believed, even though this is not dependent on their intention. Even if we're talking about when they made a mistake, and they should be chayav achatos if they did it by mistake. Tos brings down other ways that they did it. In any case, that's why Edom Zomen are not chayav achatos. What about this? You say that the voice is not considered an action, just their action, the voice is not considered an action. Is that really the case? Let's say you're not allowed to muzzle your animal when he's threshing, right? You'll have to allow him to eat. Let's say you didn't put a real muzzle on, like you see these dogs walking around with a muzzle on their faces. You just, if I call you, yelled at him, don't eat, and the animal listens to you. Chasma b'kol or heniga b'kol. Let's say you did it said lo sachrish b'shor b'chmor yachdav kalayim, 2 animals together. Let's say you did it, you didn't actually do it. You just told the 2 animals to go together and walk and do it. Rish Lakish says your potter. Rashi Tosas fence over here. Your potter, according to one says it's lav shein b'maisa ain't loken alav. But Rish Lakish himself says that lav shein b'maisa loken alav. He goes like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda. Here we're talking about Malchus. We're not talking about Chiyav Kores or Chatos B'Shogeg. But the point is, you see that Chasima B'Kol or Niu B'Kol. Rabbi Yochanan says you're chayiv. So you see that Kol does mean something. Rabbi Yochanan Mechayiv Akimas Piv Ave Maisa. Rish Lakish says Potter Akimas Piv Lave Maisa. According to the right, Rish Lakish holds at least according to the Rabbanan Akimas Piv Lave Maisa. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says it is Elam Rava. The reason is not because Kol is not considered a Maisa. We're retracting that opinion. Elam Rava Shani Edom Zomen Hol V'Yeshim B'Re'iyah. The key of Edom Zomen is what they saw. And seeing is not an action. Tanarbanan, Baal Ov, let's go into the details. What actually do you do in Ov? He speaks from a skull or bones that he raised from the dead between his joints, or between his elbows, meaning like under his armpits, right? Yidoni, what is Yidoni? He took a bone of a yadoa. What is a yadoa? Yadoa is some sort of an animal. Of course, we don't know exactly what animal that is. Rashi says it's an animal. It's possibly a fish of some sort, right? He takes this kind of a bone, befiv, boom, elef. So there's clearly, everybody agrees that's not an action. You stick it in your mouth and you don't do anything. It just talks. It talks on its own. Maybe people ask questions, what's going to happen in the future? And it talks on its own. So again, we have this shaila. According to Rabbi Akiva, everybody agrees that, speaking is an action and talking is an action, bowing is an action, and Ov is also an action. You're flapping your arms. That's also an action. According to Rabbi Akiva, what about according to Rabbanan? So that's Machlokas, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. According to Rish Lakish, the Rabbanan would say that's not an action at all. Okay, so here the Ov, the Medaber and a Prokim, so here we're saying when Ov, according to Rabbi Yochanan, even the Rabbanan say that the regular Baal Ov is an action. According to Rish Lakish, Rabbi Akiva would say that's an action. The Rabbanan would say it's only an action if you did something in the form, like we said, you sort of gathered the demons together. Meisvei. The pasuk is ka'ov me'aretz kolech. Your voice will be like you'll be in the ground, and your voice will come out of the ground like ov. My love, the mishtoi ki orcha. It doesn't matter that it comes up by itself. The mishtoi ki orcha that he speaks like in a normal way. Rashi says over here, mitoch kibro mitoch kach kol namach. That he speaks out of. Rashi said on the word yedoa, that's shem chaya. It's a name of a wild beast. Okay, some say it's a fish, whatever. But the yedoa is some sort of an animal. We don't know what it is. But here's mashma mitoch kibro mitoch kach kol namach. So it's mashma that you didn't bring it up between your joints and under your armpit, whatever. So mishtoi. So my love the mishtoi ki orcha says, "Lo, the solik it comes up for yasser and prakim." It doesn't mean that he's speaking from the grave, but rather it comes out of the grave and it's between the sorcerer's joints. When mishtoi he speaks that way. Tashma, the woman spoke to Shaul. Elokim Ra'isi or Elohim Ra'isi, I saw a godlike creature, Olim Mina Aretz, my love, the Mishtoi Ki Orche, right? It's mashma that it just talks, it comes out of the ground. It doesn't say anything about between your joints. Lo, the Yosef Ben Aprok Mishtoi comes out of the ground, he raises it out of the ground, like they raised Shaul, right? Like they raised Shaul to speak to him. They raise him out of the ground. The Mishtoi, and he speaks, and he's the skull or whatever, the bones of the skull sits between his joints or under his armpit, and Mishnah speaks that way. Whether you bring up an animal, what is bezachuro? Rashi says it's zachruso, brings him up via his genitals. Tosa says a different shot that other Rishonim say that it's zachura, that's just a kind of a sorcery. Zachura doesn't refer to a man's genitals, it rather refers to it's a kind of sorcery called zachuro. So balo whether he brings up whether he raises the dead via sechuro, or whether he asks a question of a skull. What's the difference between this? Doesn't come up in the normal way. What does it mean? Doesn't come away? It doesn't come up head first. Whether it comes up feet first. The anal b'Shabbos, and he also can't raise him on Shabbos. Nishal b'Golos, if you ask the skull, that ola kedarko, then he comes up, so to speak, head first. But ola b'Shabbos, and it can work on Shabbos too. Says, what do you mean? Ola lahechasol. What do you mean comes up? Where is he going? How come it's in front of him? Ola sounds like he gets up and walks around and goes somewhere. Right? Ola kedarko sounds velo solik l'meis. He comes up in a normal way, like the body just comes up. Not that it's sitting in his thing. So how can you say that he's coming up? We're saying that ov means that he's speaking between the bone, the skull is between the joints of the person or under his armpit. How come what do you mean? Ona kedarko, answers in the normal way. What do we mean by that? He says, Rashi says, Elo kedarko, he speaks normally, but Ona b'Shabbos answers on Shabbos too. In other words, it doesn't mean that he's Ola, he's not that he comes up in a normal way, but he speaks in the normal way. And Ona b'Shabbos, and he answers on Shabbos too. Vav Shei Lazu Shol Turnus Rupus, the Roman governor, asked Rabbi Akiva, Amalo Ma Yom Miyomim, or Mayom Yomayim, what's the difference between Shabbos? Why is Shabbos considered different than the other days? Rashi says, right, Rashi, yeah. So right. So Rashi says here that that Tunas Rubas asked him, how is this day Shabbos? Why is this day different than other days? What does that mean? Amalo, why are you better than somebody else? In other words, why somebody like you is a Sar Gadol and other people are just commoners? Amalei Tamari Tzavi, because my boss, the emperor, so wanted. He wanted me to be the governor, not the other Shmendriks. So Shabbos Nami, so we keep answering him, Shabbos Nami, Demaritzi, but Shabbos also. Why is Shabbos different than other days? Because Hashem commanded it. Our master commanded it. This is what I'm asking you. I'm not asking you why is Shabbos different than other days. How do you know today is Shabbos? How do you know which day? Maybe today is Wednesday. How do you know today is Shabbos? Amelo, Nahar Sabatayun Yochiach, the Sabbation, the famous river, the famous legendary river that flowed very strongly the whole week, and it had rocks and everything. And on Shabbos it rested. It says Nahar Sabatayun Yochiach. That can prove it because it doesn't work on Shabbos. You see, it stops flowing on Shabbos. Balov Yochiach. Balov also will prove it because that doesn't work on Shabbos, as we just said. We just said that if Nishabal Gagolas Olakadar Gadol on Shabbos or Ona on Shabbos, whereas if it's Ola B'Zechura with that kind of sorcery, it doesn't come up in the normal way and it doesn't work on Shabbos. So that kind of proves that it doesn't work Shabbos. Also, Kibbutz Shalav if Yochiach. Your father, who is resting in hell, right? Who's resting in Gehenna, proves it. Why? You know, there's a famous thing that Gehenna doesn't work on Shabbos, right? The Gehenna doesn't work on Shabbos. So look at your father's grave. All week long, smoke rises from there because he's burning in hell, right? On Shabbos, it doesn't. That proves it. Well, he wasn't too happy about that. Tunas was when he said that about his father. So he said, Amalo, biziso, biashto, bikilalto. You demeaned him, you shamed him, and you've cursed him. That you've done all those terrible things to my father. Okay. Nothing happened after that, but eventually, Rabbi Kiva was killed. Shoel Ov isn't Ov. We're talking about speaking with the dead, right? Whether you're raising these bones, however you're doing it, whether it's the kind that by the skull, which works on Shabbos, or the kinds of sorcery that doesn't work on Shabbos, or the one we mentioned in Ma'alef, where you raise the demons for that, where there's certainly an action there. So Shoel Ov, isn't it the same as Dorish Alamesim, seeking the dead? You're not supposed to seeking the dead. By the way, this always comes up. How do people go to the basic forest to talk to you're supposed to say in the schus of the father, or in various schuyot, you pray for the neshama of the dead. But it becomes a very thing that people go to the cemeteries to ask their deceased relatives for help. So it really means in their schus, you're really asking the Rebbeinu Shalom for help, maybe in their schus, and you're asking for that their neshama should have an aliyah. It's a complicated issue. But Dorish Mason, very simply, trying to speak to the dead is usher. But what's in Dorish Mason Ovidoni? So he says, Kedatanya, Dorish Mason, Kedatanya, Dorish Mason, Dorish Mason, Zeh Marabatzmo, person starves himself, Olach basic forest. He starves himself, goes into the basic forest, and as he starves himself, puts himself in a high spiritual way, so that the unclean spirit of the dead should come upon him, and he tries to speak to the dead there, and and find out what's going on. There's very stories we had in Shas about these stories asking what's going to happen in the future, what's going on the other side. When he came to this pasuk, he cried. He says, "Listen to this. Look at the power that you can do. A person who starves himself, so that the unclean spirit of the dead should come upon him, right? Shade, Rashi says the Ruach Tum is the shade shall base akfaras. In other words, he's raising the unclean spirit. There is some sort of a demon. It works. A person's doing this magic, starves himself, and sleeps in the basic forest to raise this demon, and that works. Hamar Batzmo, the first of the wide lines in the Gemara. Hamar Batzmo Kadeshi Tishlav Ruchtuma. Person starves himself in order, who starves himself in order that the spirit of holiness, the holy clean spirit should rest upon him. Al Haskam should work. What can I do? But our sins have caused us, because your sins have separated you between yourselves and God. In other words, if a person's doing something bad to raise an unclean spirit, that works. So to raise a clean spirit, if a person does the same action, serve himself, that should certainly work. But unfortunately, our sins don't allow us to get the clean spirit. Amarava, Ibot Tzadikim, the Tzadikim who were able to look at the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, how to use Hashem's name, the various letters, to create even to create animals and people. Bo Rama, they could create a whole world. Shnemar, because of your sins, you can't do it. But if you wouldn't sin, you could really create, you'd be a creator on your own. Rava Baragavra, Rava made a man, like the famous story, I don't know if it's true or not, about the Maralmi Prague, that he raised some sort of a golem, right? So maybe it's just a legend. Rava Baragavra, he made a man. Charlotte came to say, sent him Zera, having Mishtoy Badei, Rav Zera was speaking to him, he didn't answer him. You were created by charms. Go back to your dirt. In other words, you're not a person, can't speak to her. Every Erev Shabbos they would sit, the covered Shabbos. They were osek occupied with the Sefer Yitzir. They made for themselves a third-grown calf, and they ate it, either third-grown or it's the third one. Like it was like a third one of its mother, a good fat calf, and they ate it. They had a good suda Erev Shabbos. Tan Rabbanan. I guess they didn't wash. Tan Rabbanan. Ma'onein. What is Ma'onein? The pasuk says, we talked about that yesterday. Kosing summon, magic. Ma'onein umanachish umachashiv. So we've talked, right? None of those things. Sorcery, machashiv is sorcery. What is ma'onein menachas? Here he tells us. Tanarabana ma'onein. Person passes the semen of 7 different animals over his eye again in order to practice sorcery. Over his eye. Right, means to grab somebody's eyes, meaning causes a person close his eyes and open them to cause the person to hallucinate. Person who figures out times for shows, for Omer, says, oh, you know what? Hayomi, today is a good day to go out and work. In other words, like a superstition. If you go out today, you'll be successful. Tomorrow's a good day to buy food for Shabbos or whatever, to buy this or to buy anything, buy a new refrigerator. Limude arve shavios. A person that chifin yafas. It's well known that Erev Shavuos, if the wheat that grows on the Erev Shavuos is very good wheat. He has this kind of a superstition. Ikur kitnius mios ros. Uproot the beans or the legumes in order for them not to go wormy, not to go bad. That's all. Like you're figuring out times. All that thing is forbidden. Pray to God for good stuff. Tanrabanim menachesh. So that was Ma'one. What is menachesh? Omer pito nafla mipid. He believes in these kind of superstitions that his bread fell out of his mouth. In other words, he's going to have a bad day. He's going to have a bad year. Maklu nafam yado, his staff fell out of his hand. Beno karol me'achav, his son is calling from behind him, meaning these are all bad omens. Orev karvlo, or a raven is calling him, like he's going to die. Tzvi of Siko B'derech, he was on his way from east to west, and a deer was going north and south, stopped him on the way. Or Nachash Mimina B'Shul Mismolo, if he's got a snake on his right hand, on the right side, or a fox on his left hand, these are all bad omens. Don't do that kind of stuff. That's nichush. Al Taskelbi, don't start with me. In other words, when the Gabbai Tzedakah comes, or the Gabbai, the tax collector comes to collect, he says, don't start with me. If you start with me, that's a bad omen. Don't do that. Or his guy owes money to somebody, so the guy says, pay me back. He says, no, it's in the morning now. Don't start off my morning with paying back debts. That's a bad sign for me. Wait till later on. Rosh Chodeshu, Matzah Shabbos, don't start the month off this way. Don't start the week. All that is nichush. Tanarbanan lo senachshu below sonenu. The pasuk, this is a different pasuk in Vayikra. Don't do it. The lav kagon elu amenachim. These are the ones who perform sorcery bechulda with a weasel or a rat, ba'ofos with birds, or v'dagam or with fish. In other words, don't do any of these kinds of things with nichush. That's also kind of practicing superstition. Different opinions as to what exactly menachish is. Some say it's with animals, and some say it's just like using bad omens. All right, I'll pick up from the Mishnah tomorrow. Mitzvah. Have a good day, everybody. Call through.